Hi, welcome to Teaching Tips for Alphabet Knowledge. My name is Jennifer Fernandez. I'm the early childhood subject matter expert at School Specialty. Very excited to be part of the Wisconsin Early Childhood Conference. I'm coming to you from Lago Vista, Texas, which is just a little town northwest of Austin, Texas. I was a pre-K and kindergarten teacher for many, many years, 20 plus. I also have a master's in bilingual education and taught bilingual ed for much of my career as well. Taught a few other grades along the way. In 2013, I went to work for the city of San Antonio, Texas. They started a program called Pre-K 4 for 4-year-olds, SA, and I worked as a professional learning specialist doing training, mentoring, coaching for early childhood teachers in the city of San Antonio to support 4 early childhood centers that they had opened and they were running. The city of San Antonio was running. Very cool program. And then in 2020, I had the opportunity to join School Specialty. And hopefully you've heard of School Specialty. We're a company that sells furniture, classroom supplies, and materials for infants up to high school. In my role, I don't like being called an expert. I don't think we're ever an expert. We're always learning. But in my role, I get to support our salespeople as they work with customers and selecting what they need for the early childhood environment. I get to work with our merchandising team to make sure we have the right products for our customers. And I get to work with our marketing team on things like the catalog and the website and any kind of flyer or email you might get from us. So and then lastly, I get to do professional development. So I get to present at early childhood conferences all over the United States because I cover the whole United States in my role, which is very fascinating to me to learn about early childhood all over. I'm very excited to do today's presentation on the alphabet. I did research this and present this when I worked in San Antonio, but most recently I was in Norfolk, Virginia, doing professional development for back to school and got really good feedback about this. I was a little concerned because I thought, well, maybe people know a lot of these things already. They were things I know I was not doing right as a pre-K teacher. So I hoped that was the case for other people, and that was the feedback I got. A lot of people walked away with some new information. We debunked some myths, I think, and so hopefully that will be the same for those of you watching today. I have 3 objectives I hope that we achieve by the end of the session: that you'll understand the importance of teaching alphabet knowledge, you'll become aware of the difficulties related to teaching alphabet knowledge, and then we'll learn about some appropriate practices for teaching alphabet knowledge. We're going to start with a quiz. I'm going to put a statement up, and if we were together, I could have you hold up a true or false sticky to let me know your answer. Unfortunately, I cannot see you. So if you want to jot down true or false or shout it out at the camera, however you want to try to answer the questions of the quiz. So the first question is, or statement, there are 26 phonemes, individual sounds in the English language. And that would be false. And I'm not going to tell you why any of these are true or false because we'll be talking about them as we go through today's session. Letter naming is harder than letter recognition. And that is true. Our next statement, letters are easier for children to learn if the sound of the letter is similar to the name of the letter. That would be true. It is best to use different instructional terms each day to build vocabulary. So some days you call them big letters and little letters, capital letters, uppercase letters, lowercase letters, and that would be false. Pre-K alphabet knowledge predicts later reading success. That's true. That's one of the main reasons we're talking about it today. It is best to teach letters in order from A to Z. That is false, and that was one of the things I thought was true in my teaching career. And lastly, letters are best taught using multi-sensory instruction. And that would be true. Well, hopefully you got 100%. Actually, I hope you didn't, because then that means you're going to learn something today. So let's start by talking about alphabet knowledge. What exactly do we mean by that? What is the definition? And it is just that, the knowledge of the names and sounds associated with printed letters. Sometimes it gets interchanged with the term alphabetic principle, which is related, but the definition of that is the idea that written spellings represent the sounds of spoken words in reading and writing. So slightly different, but I think some people don't truly know the difference between the two, and you often hear people mixing them up. What we do know is that alphabet knowledge varies widely. Children in the same class can have varying levels of alphabet knowledge. So we can't have this one size fits all approach to teaching the alphabet. The next thing we want to talk about is, why is it important? Well, early alphabet knowledge is one of the best predictors of later literacy achievement. And on the flip side, struggles with alphabet knowledge can indicate difficulties with literacy achievement later on. Lastly, alphabet knowledge is a key component to early literacy instruction. There are actually 4 factors that research has shown that determine future literacy success. Alphabet knowledge is one, phonological awareness is another, concepts of print, and oral language development. So what is so difficult about teaching the ABCs? Sounds easy enough. Well, there's several things that make it difficult. First of all, letters are abstract symbols. Do you all know what these words say? Some of you might. They all actually say hello in different languages. But if you aren't familiar with any of these symbols, they probably kind of all look alike to you. Our alphabet is really a code that represents spoken print, and that's true of any language. But there's really nothing about symbols, particularly since we're talking about the English alphabet. There's nothing about the symbol S that tells you the name is S, the sound is. So societies many, many years ago determined that various symbols would represent letters, and letters would come together to make words. If you're not part of that society that learns the rules, that learns the code at some point in your life, then they just remain random symbols. There are 26 letters, but there are actually 52 symbols that children need to learn. This is a lot for young children to hold in their memory. So if we talk about uppercase and lowercase altogether, that makes 52 different symbols. And this is strictly symbols. We're not even talking about the sounds. Letters have similar shapes. Can you think of any letters in our alphabet that look a little bit alike? Hopefully you thought of some of these. So one of the things we want to be careful about is when you're typing something on the computer, preparing something for the class, or writing something, be very careful about the font that you use. Be very consistent in what you use, because we don't want to add to that confusion. I purposely picked some fonts that probably made these more similar, more confusing. Additionally, research suggests that children are more likely to know the names of lowercase letters that have more distinct shapes, because they often confuse letters that have similar shapes, like we see that BDPQ on the left. And then also we know that sometimes upper and lowercase letters can look very similar, like X, O, S. So children are more likely to know those letters versus ones that are very, very different, like uppercase G, lowercase g look very different. Uppercase E, lowercase e look very different. Direction matters. If you think about most toys, like this truck, if I drive it this way or I drive it this way, the direction doesn't really matter. I still can use the truck. Blocks, doesn't matter which way I hold it, can still play with it. So children really aren't so attuned to direction because it's not that important in their world. But directionality is very important when it comes to the alphabet. We know there's lots of letters depending on what direction they're facing, up, down, left, right, is going to change the name and the sound that that letter has. Names and sounds are complicated. Sometimes the actual name of a letter can cause confusion when you're trying to figure out the sound. I don't know if you can think of any examples. Let you think for a second, that the name would be confusing. But if you've ever watched children do inventive spelling, and for example, they want to write something that starts with H, but maybe they put an A. Why? Because that's the sound we hear, H. Same thing with D, D, W starts with the D sound. Maybe they write a D instead of W. How about W, W, Y? Maybe they're putting a W. There is even some conflicting research that says don't even teach letter names because it's confusing to children to start with sounds. Others say to teach letters and sounds together. What word is this? You may have gotten it right, but you may have not. Why? Because many letters have more than one sound. You can say ooh, you. So if you didn't know that, you may not have been able to pronounce that word. Can you think of some letters that make more than one sound? All of our vowels, obviously, as well as some of our consonants, G and C. Y, if it's at the end of the word, can say I, can say E, like happy, fly, or it makes that Y sound at the beginning of the word. X, we have Xerox, it makes a Z sound. We have X-ray, we have taxi, makes the X sound. So we know that there's several consonants that make more than one sound. All right, so now we know why teaching the alphabet is difficult. And you probably know it because you live it every day, but sometimes we don't really think through those difficulties. So how do we teach the alphabet using developmentally appropriate practice? Well, the first thing we want to talk about is how many letters should pre-K4 students know by the end of the pre-K4 year in order to have a strong chance of reading on grade level by the end of first grade. So I'm going to let you think about that for a second. Again, if we were in person, I'd have a little game for us to play. We could put some sticky notes up on the wall and see what people guessed. But the research actually says that children should know 18 uppercase and 15 lowercase by the end of the pre-K4 year to have a strong chance of reading on grade level by the end of first grade. This comes from a study by Shane Piasta. Another part of his study that I thought was very interesting, and I will quote him, he looked across a classroom that participated in a one-year project as part of his study. And children in the same preschool classroom differed in their alphabet knowledge by an average of 25 letters. So think about that. You could have a child that knew one letter in your classroom and someone else that knew all 26. And then he broke it down to there was a difference of 14 uppercase, 13 lowercase. Children in the same kindergarten classroom differed by an average of 11 letters, 5 uppercase, 6 lowercase. So even same teacher, same classroom, same curriculum, but you've got that vast difference in how children are acquiring alphabet knowledge. So what do the early learning standards say? Well, I'm going to start with the Texas standards because I live in Texas. I probably taught most of my career in Texas. We use something called the Texas Pre-K Guidelines. They actually just got revised this year to include outcomes for 3-year-olds. They were just for 4-year-olds. And what they say for pre-K3, that they show an awareness of letters by singing alphabet songs, recognizing some frequently encountered letters like in their first name or environmental print, and that pre-K4 should know the names of 20 letters, and that's upper or lowercase, so less than what the research is saying. What about Wisconsin? That's probably who you really care about because that's where you live. So your Wisconsin model early learning standards talk about children being able to recognize and name all letters of the alphabet, upper and lowercase, in familiar and unfamiliar words. So you have a much higher standard in Wisconsin, but helps us to put things into perspective. All right, so let's talk about some tips for teaching the alphabet so that we are doing it the right way. In our quiz, we talked about teaching the letters from A to Z. When I was a pre-K teacher, that seemed very logical to me. All the books go from A to Z, the song goes from A to Z. Why do we want to jumble up all the letters? But I may not have been right. So we're going to find out. I'm going to show you some letter names and letter sounds in groupings. I'm going to start with letter names. And again, if we were together, I have a little game where you sort these out, but if you could just find a piece of paper and pen, and if you were to slide these left-hand rectangles onto my chart here, from easiest to learn to hardest to learn letters, what order would you put these in? Which letters or groupings of letters are the easiest to learn down to the hardest? Give you a second for that. Kind of think about it, jot it down. And then when you finish that, we're going to do the same thing with letter sounds. I will give you a hint that the very last box on the letter sound side is actually blank. So you'll only be filling in the top. And again, from easiest to hardest, learning letter sounds. Now, I should give you much more time than I'm giving you because this is a thinking task. It would be more fun to be doing it with friends and talking about it, figuring it out. But in the interest of time, I'm going to actually show you the answers. So research shows that on the left-hand side, the easiest letters to learn, O, B, A, C, X, and then they progressively get harder, U and V being the hardest letter names to learn, and then letter sounds, CAB, and then U and Y being the harder sounds to learn, probably because they have more than one sound, right? So I find this very interesting. And then there's a lot of factors in this too, like maybe some of those letters are easy to learn because they see them a lot, like capital T and lowercase e in books in the word the. Uppercase Z, we probably don't see that as often. There are more names, like I have a son, Zach, than there probably were back in the day, but other than that, you don't see capital Z very often. All right, tip number 2. When teaching letters, we want to start with high frequency distinct consonants and 1 or 2 vowels. And this kind of reflects back to the activity we just did. So some of those letters that were at the top of the chart would be the ones that you want to start with. But you also want to start with letters in children's names and other familiar words. Learning letters in their names, especially the first letter of their name, first letter of their last name, is very motivating to children, and it's very meaningful. It has meaning to them. Also, names of their friends becomes very important as they're entering school. And then other words like mom and dad. I live in Texas and our grocery store is HEB. Everybody knows those letters, just like the M for McDonald's. So environmental print can factor in. Names of people in their family, pets, etc. You do want to make sure that you have lots of opportunities for children to see names, to interact with names. You want to play games with children's names and pictures. Make sure their names are all around the room on their cubbies, on their rest mat or cot. Maybe have a sign in. This would probably be for later in the school year. Early in the school year, maybe they just move their name from home to school in some kind of an arrival chart. Making a class book with their name and their picture to put in the library area are all great ideas for exposure to the letters in children's names. And then you also can take this opportunity to have them practice writing their name. We don't want to make them stay on the line. It doesn't have to be written perfectly, but getting them to start trying as they build those fine motor skills will be helpful as well. In the quiz, we saw this one. Letter recognition comes before letter naming. It is easier just to point to a letter. If I say point to the letter E, that is a less difficult skill than me saying what letter is this. Now, that doesn't mean you should never ask a child that, but just know that it's a progression. And I liken this to learning a language. I speak Spanish. It is not my native language, but I remember when I was learning Spanish, it was much easier for me to listen to somebody and understand what they were saying than for me to actually produce a sentence and speak in Spanish. Tip number 5, be explicit and systematic. So we don't want to drill and kill and flashcards, but we also don't want to skip the opportunity to come right out and say, this is the letter C. This is uppercase C. This is lowercase c. C makes the k sound for cactus. Linking it to some kind of a visual cue is very helpful. But besides being explicit and systematic, we want to be careful of the resources we're using to do that. So we're going to play a little game called Analyze Your Resources, which is actually tip number 6. So when you're looking at your alphabet cards and posters and charts, you want to make sure that the pictures are pretty obvious. That's sometimes easier said than done. And you want to make sure to avoid words that start with blends. You want to have a pure beginning sound. So I'm going to use this as an example. Flag starts with FL, fl, not the best option to use. Starfish starts with an ST. Train starts with TR. Xylophone's tricky because there's not really anything that starts with that X sound that we're teaching for the letter X. So that makes it tricky. And I also think the picture for N, they could think it was the letter G. They might even not even know their numerals yet, 9. So that might not have been the best choice. This is a carpet that we sell at School Specialty, and actually I have asked them to correct it because I found some of the mistakes that I've been talking about on this carpet. So I'm going to give you a second to kind of look at it and see if you can find the things that I asked to be changed. And that was C for crab, starts with the CR, the grapes, GR, the star, ST, the tree, TR, and you could probably find other things to criticize as well, like ice cream. I probably should have found something that started with the short I sound, but this is a harder task than it seems. And then these are some carpet squares we sell at School Specialty. They are not our Childcraft brand. We get them from another company, so I probably cannot tell them to change these. But if I could, the ones I would change are drum, DR, earth, because isn't really our E sound that we're teaching. Flag, that's the FL. Giraffe, because we more often start with the G sound than the J sound. Tree, TR. The yacht, to me, looks like a sailboat, so I think that could be confusing to children for the letter Y. Also, owl starts more with the ow sound, so maybe a different O word. And the last one might be hen for H, because I think children will probably say chicken. These are some alphabet cards. This will be the last one that we look at. So again, we buy these from a company. I don't have any influence over changing them, but I would call out the drum, DR, the frog, FR, and the sloth, SL. So take a look at your resources and see if you're using good ones or not. Our next tip is teaching letters in small groups versus whole group. Research shows that it is more effective to work with a group of 2 to 5 children than trying to teach the whole class or even one-on-one. You're able to differentiate more, it's more engaging, you've got some peer models but not so many that it's overwhelming, and then it's easier to give that early literacy instruction to children, and then be more effective. I know I struggled with this as a teacher. I did a lot of whole group. Somebody once told me, spray and pray that everybody gets it, just kind of shoot for the middle. Very ineffective. But more my fear was small group. If I have a small group, what are the rest of the children doing? And making sure that they weren't getting in trouble or wasting their time. Over time, as I've learned more and I've seen more classrooms, I think I could go back and do that a lot more effectively. There are ways to do that. Our next tip is about integrating teaching letters throughout the curriculum. So while we have our language arts time, and that's our time when we talk about whatever letters we're working on, that can't be the only time that we talk about it. We want to look for opportunities throughout the day to continue to mention those letters, talk about those letters, put them in context, to reinforce what we have taught. So I put some examples here, like coming to class in the morning on the left, and I know this isn't the greatest photo, but it says, do you have a letter E in your name? And so the children drop their name into the pocket chart. Yes, I do, or no, I do not. Very easy way to be reinforcing lowercase e. I show the boys lined up at the bathroom because I think transition time can take about an hour and a half of our day, and it can be wasted time when it really should be educational time. So using our transition opportunities to reinforce letters. So all these boys are standing here waiting while the other boys are trying to use the restroom. Hey, did you bring your magic pencil today? Get your magic pencil out. We're going to see if we can make that letter T that we were talking about. So we're going to draw a T in the air. Maybe you can draw it on your hand. Maybe you could draw it on your friend's back and see if they can guess it. Can you make a T with your body? So finding ways, again, maybe we were lining up to go to the bathroom. If you have a D in your name, line up at the door. If you have a letter in your name that makes the sound, line up at the door. And then you can see an example here of something you might have at learning centers, again, that reinforces the alphabet. We don't want to spend so much time teaching the alphabet that we neglect other goals like having conversations with children and building oral language development. We don't want to interrupt children to be quizzing them on letters. What letter is that? What letter does that start with? What sound does that make? But more, it's about looking for those natural opportunities when we're playing with children. Maybe I'm at the art area with my students. Wow, I see we have a lot of markers that have the letter B. Did you see the blue has a B and the brown has a B and the black has a B? So looking for just those more natural opportunities to embed that knowledge. The next tip says to teach letter names and sounds simultaneously. We talked a little bit about this previously, but research does talk about not teaching them in isolation, but it's more effective that they're taught at the same time. And again, this also relates back to that explicit systematic where we say the name of the letter, the sound, we relate it to a picture. The next tip is up for grabs. Research is not clear regarding if it is better to teach the uppercase letters first, then the lowercase letters, or if you should teach upper and lowercase at the same time. So I can't tell you one way is better than the other because they have not determined that yet. And the last tip, we want to make sure we're teaching sounds correctly. There's a little video, and I've put the link here. I'd hoped to show it, but I was having some technical difficulties, so I'm just going to tell you about it, but you're welcome to go watch it on YouTube. It's actually a woman is selling some kind of program, so I'm not trying to sell her program, but I liked her example of how we teach sounds to children, because without even looking at print or letters, it really helps to spend some time just talking about the letter sounds, but we need to make sure we're doing it properly. So what she talks about in the video is, and she uses the letter R as an example. Many people would say R. The sound for R is R. But really the sound for R is R. R. And when we say letter sounds the proper way, it's going to make blending sounds later on easier and more natural. So she gave the example of the word rat. If kind of our old way of sounding out, we would have done r, a, t, where we're kind of almost adding sound to the letter sound. But if we make more pure sounds like r, a, t, rat, I'm able to blend. If I do it the old way, r-a-ta, 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 I never get to rat. And so she just demonstrates that. And I mention this because when I go into classrooms, I actually do see that people are still doing the b and the p and the duh instead of b, p, t, making more pure sounds, not adding on that extra sound. So it's important that we teach sounds correctly because from birth to 8 is the window for discriminating, sequencing, and manipulating sounds or phonemes. In the quiz, I asked you if there were 26 phonemes in the English language. There are actually 44, and that goes back to that idea that some of our letters make more than one sound. So now these children have to learn 52 different symbols, 44 different sounds. They have a very large task in front of them when it comes to acquiring alphabet knowledge. It helps if we actually talk about the sounds, how they're the same, how they're different, looking at our mouths, maybe looking in a mirror, watching a friend when they're making a sound. What are you doing with your lips? What are you doing with your teeth, your tongue? And talking about that as we talk about the sounds or in relation to a sound. When I worked in San Antonio, for a while they used a program called LIPS, and it was developed by a speech pathologist. And one of the pieces, and it was very much focused on letter sounds and looking at our mouths, and as I just discussed. But another thing that they talked about was, is your voice on or off? If you put your hand on your throat and make the F sound, now make the V sound. We're going to do it again. If you notice what your mouth is doing and your throat while you do that, my mouth is doing the same thing. My teeth are in the front touching my bottom lip, but my voice is either off or on because you feel a vibration with that V sound. So pointing things out like that, I used to, when I did the letter H, I'd say put your hand in front of your mouth and you can feel your breath. So any tips like that are helpful to children, and we can't assume that they kind of realize this. So it'll give them support as they're learning all those different phonemes. What about letter of the week? I was very much a letter of the week person because it was very systematic for me. It was fun. I could be thematic. But research actually tells us a couple of things. We know that letters are easier or harder to learn based on the letter features, if they're in a child's name. But when you do letter of the week, it gives equal time to learning each letter. Maybe children need more time for a certain letter or less time for a certain letter. Research also tells us that each child learns letters and sounds following certain patterns. Well, letter of the week really ignores that. It ignores the child's background knowledge, the difference in how each child learns the letters, your assessment data. You know the child already knows the letter C, but yet you're spending a whole week on it. You're kind of wasting their time. They already know that, right? So we're able to differentiate more, and we should differentiate more rather than just trying to do that one size fits all that I talked about at the beginning that we know doesn't work. And then the other thing research tells us is that there are significant connections between learning the alphabet and phonological awareness. But letter of the week really focuses on the letter sound activities, and doesn't call a lot of attention to phonological awareness skills. And these are the skills of phonological awareness. When I see that word, I think about a phone, phonological phone. When you're on the phone, you're not looking at print, you're not looking at pictures, you're not reading words, you're just talking and listening. And that's what phonological awareness is about, just hearing sounds. Do you hear that there are individual words in a sentence? Do you hear that there are syllables in a word? Do you hear that there are the same ending sounds in rhyming words? Or do you hear the same beginning sound when we're talking about alliteration? So there's many other skills that are part of phonological awareness, but we really aren't even looking at the letters when we're talking about phonological awareness. We're more listening. Do we hear those sounds within words? And remember, that is also a predictor of, or part of early literacy instruction, and a predictor of reading success if you have strong phonological awareness skills. What about worksheets? I do a whole session called No Worksheets Allowed. It is not developmentally appropriate practice to give young children worksheets. Worksheets might work for older children, but our younger learners learn in different ways. That learning needs to be fun, engaging, hands-on, minds-on. We can't force young children to learn on demand, but rather because they want to learn. And so we need to make sure that that learning is presented in such a way that works for them. They're using their five senses to find out about the world around them. And a worksheet does not really engage those five senses. We have to make sure that the learning is meaningful, it's connected to what they know and understand. They like to discover and play, experience, ask questions, discuss, interact with people, interact with learning materials. And worksheets really are just very abstract for these young concrete learners. My favorite story about worksheets is from, my sons are in their 20s, but one of their kindergarten teachers was a friend of mine, and I used to work with her. But I ran into her years later after my children were out of kindergarten. And she was very upset because her school district had purchased science workbooks for the kindergartners. And she said, it's ridiculous. One of the pages says, circle everything that is smooth. And it shows rocks and pine cones and trees and sticks. And she said, do you know what they circled? They circled everything because the page is smooth. So very concrete learners at this age. So if we're not using worksheets, then what should we do? How do we teach alphabet knowledge? Well, there are lots of different kinds of learners, and we want to make sure that we're providing activities for each of those different kinds of learners. Some children are visual learners. They need to see it. They notice details, similarities, differences. They might be kind of quiet. They may have trouble remembering verbal instructions. So having visual materials that support alphabet knowledge will be beneficial to them. So obviously books, picture cards. We've got picture cards in a pocket chart. We have our alphabet cards, making puzzles, alphabet puzzles. You see this was done with a child's name, alphabet charts, name tags on the desk. All those kinds of things are going to help our visual learners. Other children are more auditory learners. They need to hear it. These are the students that like to be read to. They're very social. They like to talk and ask lots of questions. They might even make noise because it's too quiet. They actually respond to some more traditional teaching methods. So they're going to need things like music, songs, chants, auditory games, echo and response, repetition, dialogic read-alouds. And so you can see some different examples here. What you may not know is on the left is actually a puzzle that makes sound. It has batteries and you turn it on, but as you place each letter on the puzzle, it will say the name of the letter and the picture that goes with it. So something like that would be perfect for our auditory learners. Kinesthetic learners just need to do it. They need to use their whole body. They might be mistaken for having ADHD because they need to move to learn. So they are doing movements and actions, they're in constant motion, they want to play and dance and do exercise. So things that will help the kinesthetic learner, pointers, I can go around the room and go on a letter hunt. You can see we have the giant alphabet fishing where I can kind of use a lot of my body to catch those big fish that have alphabet letters, and those can be used indoors or outdoors. In the middle, they're making letters with their body. We've got our poly spots with letters. They can jump or hop or walk. Same thing with our carpet squares with letters. And then we even have a balance beam that has alphabet letters on it. So all of those would be very appropriate for our kinesthetic learners. And then we have tactile learners. They're similar to kinesthetic, but they really only need to use their hands and fingers. They're very hands-on, lots of fine motor. They want to touch and feel. They have good hand-eye coordination. So you can see here, there's lots of ways to support them. Making letters in finger paint, shaving cream, salt, sand, using sandpaper letters, Play-Doh to make letters, wiki sticks, other manipulatives like magnetic letters and letter puzzles, stringing or lacing letters. We have our chicka chicka boom boom tree in the middle, which has the letters that stick to the tree. So I couldn't even fit all the tactile examples on this particular slide, but there are many ways to support those children. And then lastly, this isn't necessarily a learning style, but something to consider is also using nature. There's a big movement to kind of bring the outdoors indoors. We know children are not interacting as much with nature. They're scared of nature. They don't know how to take care of nature. So any experiences we can give them with natural items is beneficial. We also know those items are calming. They're very sensory. They're open-ended. So you can see some nature examples of how the alphabet knowledge was embedded using materials from nature. The items on the bottom are actually things we have at School Specialty. So we work with a company out of England called Yellow Door, and they have many products that are made out of, it's a stone and resin mix, but it feels like natural stone. So you can see the alphabet letters at the bottom. They come in uppercase, lowercase. The ones on the left you could actually trace or you could imprint into Play-Doh. These can be used indoors, outdoors, Santa water table. So lots and lots of ways to use those materials. So hopefully you'll think about nature when you're teaching the alphabet as well. We also don't want to forget about children's literature. There are many great books that support alphabet learning. I have a few, probably older, tried and true examples here, but I'm always seeing new books coming out in fun and exciting ways to talk about the alphabet. There are, you don't even have to go buy these books. I always was a good user of our local library, and I love that I could go online, I could request some books. They would, email me when they were ready, and I just had to pop in, pick them up, and didn't have to waste a lot of time. And it was easy for me then to swap out books, because we don't want to just keep the same books out all the time. We need to be changing those books out. Children get bored with that, and it's a missed opportunity because there's so much children's literature out there and some really good quality books that we want to expose children to. That leads into also involving families. We want to maximize exposure in the classroom, but we also want to loop our parents in because they can be supporting as well. And we have to remember that sometimes parents want to do the best for their children, but they may not always know what to do. So giving them tips like, hey, read books to your children, help them get a library card. I got a grant to get books that I was able to send a book home every day with every child, so parents had a book at home to read to their children. Telling them to talk about letters with their children when they're driving in the car, what they see on the signs, when they're waiting at the doctor's office, they're in the grocery store. Can they talk about letters and point them out just as you're doing in the classroom? What about writing letters? This is related, so I thought it might be worth mentioning. So we developmentally appropriate practice says that tracing or writing letters doesn't necessarily lead to learning letter names, but there are some pre-K guidelines or standards that talk about writing alphabet letters. We have to be careful that we don't push children to try to form letters with precision or writing on the lines, because developmentally they don't have those motor skills to be able to do that. But we do know that children go through developmental stages of writing. So, starting from scribbling all the way to being able to write a complete sentence, which probably isn't going to happen in pre-K. Of course, this is over years of time. But as pre-K teachers, we need to be aware of these developmental stages of writing. We want to make sure our focus isn't on handwriting, but rather on emergent writing. When children seem interested in writing letters, we want to offer assistance, both formally and informally, and we want to accept their attempts at writing letters given these stages of writing. Again, we'll look at those Wisconsin Model Early Learning Standards, and these are some of the things they say about writing letters. And they kind of go in a progression from the easier to the harder. Begin to use writing tools, scribbling, making unconventional shapes, and then they might start making lists and thank you notes, writing their names, labeling objects, labeling pictures using scribbles or letter-like forms. And then a little bit later on, you're going to start seeing that they're able to write recognizable letters, write letters in their name, maybe some words, and use their knowledge of sounds and letters to write some words and phrases. So that inventive spelling that we've talked about. So what is developmentally appropriate? We want to make sure that we're providing lots of fine motor activities. Writing is difficult for pre-K children, and it progresses slowly through the preschool years. So students need opportunities, tools, time, adult support to develop those skills. They're just starting to develop comfort and agility with fine motor work, but they may experience some failure and frustration, going to feel incompetent, stressed out if we're making them do something like we see on the left, stay on a line, trace a letter. When they don't have that control yet to be able to do that, they don't have the muscles in their hand aren't developed, they don't have the eye-hand coordination, they don't have the steadiness and patience, or like copying something from the board would be inappropriate. Also, you may not even realize that 4-year-olds still have cartilage that hasn't hardened into bone in their wrists. So while you and I might be able to do this, a 4-year-old cannot because of that. And that doesn't happen until age 6. That even puts some constraints on their fine motor capacity. So most 4-year-olds cannot, do that circular motion, which when you're trying to write, you may need to do. Tracing or writing their name or letters multiple times on a worksheet is not effective. More effective, something like this, a sign-in sheet where there's a purpose for them to try to write their name. Maybe doing some kind of a survey where they have to sign up, signing up for lunch. So looking for those meaningful and engaging ways, making a sign for a learning center or a label for a classroom material. Those are going to be the ways that we get children interested in writing, because we don't want to make them do something they're not capable of doing, where they become frustrated and then they don't want to write because they don't like it. We've made it unlikable for them. All right, so as we near the end here, I just want to thank you for allowing me and School Specialty to be part of this conference. Again, School Specialty, we have everything infants to high school, furniture and classroom supplies, as you can see here. Hopefully you're also familiar with our Childcraft brand. That is the furniture that we make in Pennsylvania. Hopefully you have some of it in your classroom. And I had to include the 5 C's of Childcraft not because I'm not supposed to advertise, but because we're talking about the alphabet. So you can see we went with our alphabet theme and talking about the quality, child safe, cleanable, furniture that we offer for early childhood classrooms. And you're welcome to visit schoolspecialty.com if you saw any items today as part of the PowerPoint. Many of the things are things that we do sell at School Specialty that you feel might be able to support you as you're working on alphabet knowledge. Lastly, I am going to ask if there's a QR code or there is a web address here that if you would not mind accessing to fill out an evaluation about how you felt about today's session. That helps me to improve what I'm doing. If you have questions about anything today, you can see that I've provided my email address, my phone number. I am very happy and willing to try to answer questions. I'm not going to say I know all the answers, but even when I don't, I am able to try to find them for you. So hopefully you've learned something new today. Again, I thank you so much for allowing me to participate in the conference, and good luck in teaching alphabet knowledge.